Exactly 12 minutes had passed before Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez understood the crushing reality that she had brought a curriculum based on gender theory to a heavyweight championship involving serious financial policy. Looking back, the red flags were evident the moment she stepped onto the gleaming CNN platform. Waiting there was Senator John Kennedy, sporting a grin that appeared charming, right up until you recognized it as the look a house cat adopts before leaving a lifeless rodent at your toes. The physical proof of his readiness was intimidating, with a yellow notepad entirely obscured by handwritten scribbles spread out on the desk before him. To his right sat a massive pile of printed papers, and a coffee mug displaying the slogan, "I Heart Capitalism," sat ominously nearby. It was clearly a prop he had transported from his own house to make a visual declaration before a single sentence was uttered. The entire production was a CNN concept, marketed as a critical town hall showdown regarding the destiny of the American economic system. They desired sparks, so they summoned one warrior from each extreme of the political landscape. In the blue corner sat AOC, embodying the progressive left's vast dream of democratic socialism. In the red corner sat Kennedy, symbolizing classic fiscal conservatism presented with a misleadingly sluggish Southern accent. The studio crowd was split perfectly to correspond, with half the chairs occupied by youthful, spirited progressive campaigners who likely took leave from various nonprofit roles to applaud their idol. The opposing half was comprised of elderly, rugged conservatives who looked as though they had been paying federal taxes since before AOC was born. Situated between them was the moderator, Jake Tapper, appearing noticeably anxious as if he predicted the impending disaster but lacked the power to prevent it. Tapper commenced the event with what ought to have been an easy inquiry, setting up the subject of inflation. AOC grabbed the chance, diving instantly into her standard, well-practiced monologue. She talked fervently about corporate avarice being the primary source of all financial troubles, condemning price hiking and sketching a vivid image of billionaires robbing wealth from laboring households. She nailed every one of her talking points with rehearsed accuracy, utilizing the specific keywords that always performed well in short TikTok videos, and earned thousands of eager shares from her followers. The progressive section of the spectators devoured it, cheering excitedly as she concluded her opening remarks. She appeared self-assured, believing she was currently leading. Then Senator Kennedy leaned in, and that amiable feline grin expanded just a tiny bit. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez," he started, talking in that syrup-thick Louisiana accent that makes every phrase sound like it is being offered with a glass of sweet tea on a veranda. That is all truly fascinating. But before we get too far into the details on this, I wonder if you might assist me with a small matter. You see, I am merely a humble country attorney. Well, I am a senator now, but I still think in that manner, and I am having some difficulty tracking your logic. Could you do me a brief kindness and simply define inflation for me, just so we are all operating with the identical definition? AOC blinked for a second, unsettled by the basic nature of the inquiry. She bounced back fast, restating her earlier argument with slightly more force, saying inflation is when costs rise due to unchecked corporate avarice. Kennedy stopped her very softly, raising a palm. "No, ma'am. See, that is what you believe triggers inflation. That is your hypothesis. I am requesting you to describe what the term inflation actually signifies. You know, the standard economic explanation. You possess an economics degree from Boston University, so I am entirely positive you studied the textbook explanation back then." The snare had been laid with expert subtlety, and AOC had not even noticed the tripwire yet. What transpired over the subsequent few minutes was fated to become the most shared incident in political debating since the Biden-Palin contests years ago. If you believe that characterization is an exaggeration, you must wait until you witness the actual evidence Kennedy brought to the discussion. With the painful slowness of a hunter who understands its quarry has nowhere to flee, Kennedy reached toward his pile of documents and extracted a particular paper. He treated it with the greatest care, like a solicitor displaying vital, condemning proof in a capital homicide case, which, considering his history, made total sense. "Representative," he went on, grasping the sheet with both hands, "you graduated from Boston University with a diploma in economics. That is truly admirable, as I myself attended Vanderbilt and Oxford, yet I admit I still struggle with long division occasionally." The self-effacing quip elicited a real chuckle from the crowd, diffusing the strain for a fleeting moment. "So I am certain, with your vast economics knowledge, you can assist in educating all of us plain folks regarding complicated economic strategy. I am honestly looking forward to gaining some knowledge tonight." He raised the paper so the lenses could capture a clear view of it, stating, "This right here is your university transcript, or parts of it at least. These are the sections that became public record when you filed for that congressional internship back during college. The Freedom of Information Act is genuinely a magnificent tool, is it not?" AOC's assured grin wavered slightly, and her eyes flicked to the document. "Now I observe here on this file that you took Introduction to Macroeconomics during your freshman year. That is a solid beginning. Then you took Introduction to Microeconomics your sophomore year, and then, let's see, one upper-level economics elective during your junior year. And that is everything, 3 economics classes in total." Kennedy glanced up from the sheet with theatrical bewilderment, wrinkling his forehead. "That appears a bit sparse for an economics degree, does it not?" He thumbed through a few additional sheets of the dossier. "But I do notice you took numerous other captivating classes. You took Gender and Sexuality in the Modern World. You took Intersectionality and Social Justice, and Post-Colonial Theory. All captivating topics, I am certain, but they are not precisely economics, are they?" He withdrew another piece of paper for comparison. "This sheet lists Boston University's real degree criteria for an economics major. Undergraduates require a minimum of 12 specific economics classes, including econometrics, advanced micro and macro theory, monetary policy, and international economics. You completed 3, meaning your degree is technically in economics and international relations with a very significant focus on the IR portion." He gazed back down at her grade sheet, his digit following a row. "And that Introduction to Microeconomics course, that is the one where you study the absolute essentials about supply and demand curves, marginal cost, and market equilibrium. The fundamental cornerstones of the whole field. You earned a C+ in that course, ma'am." The conservative portion of the hall began to whisper, while the progressive side appeared suddenly ill at ease. Kennedy raised a palm as if to protect her, saying, "Now I am not claiming a C+ is horrific." He proceeded in that folksy tone that somehow rendered the factual claim even more crushing. "Heck, I earned a C+ in statistics back at Vanderbilt, and I still managed to finish school. But the distinction is, I do not go around suggesting to totally overhaul the entire statistical framework of the United States of America based on that C+ comprehension. That would simply be absurd." Ocasio-Cortez, now clearly on the defensive, tried to seize back the narrative. She aligned her posture and gazed straight into the lens, attempting to steer away from her school records. "Senator," she started, "economics is not merely about frigid formulas, sterile charts, or archaic textbooks. It is about actual humans. It is about comprehending the hardships of working households and how the present structure fails them." Kennedy did not skip a beat, nodding along with her as if they were in complete accord. "Oh, I concur with you entirely, ma'am, he stated, his pitch lowering an octave into a more grave timbre. Economics is definitely about people. Specifically, it is about the folks who lose their employment and their livelihoods when politicians who earned C+s in basic economics attempt to enact sweeping policies they do not truly comprehend. But let us examine your professional economics expertise more closely. After college, you graduated, and then you became a professional economist, correct? He paused, allowing the silence to hover in the atmosphere for a weighty second. AOC stayed quiet. Her jaw tightened. Oh, wait, that is accurate, Kennedy went on, touching his temple as if suddenly recalling. You did not do that. You became a bartender. Now do not misunderstand me, that is honorable labor. I have a profound regard for that. My own father possessed a small business, and I was brought up to think that honest labor is honest labor, regardless of what it is. But representative, tending bar and mixing beverages, is not precisely the identical thing as working at the Federal Reserve. You did not become an economist. You did not work in the high-stakes realm of finance, and you did not even become a junior accountant. You poured beers and served cocktails, which demands a collection of skills like people skills and multitasking. But those are not the skills required to govern a national economy. Kennedy leaned back in his seat, crossing one leg over the other, appearing totally at ease, while AOC looked increasingly like she was seated in an interrogation chamber. So let us recap where we are up to now, he said, tallying on his fingers. You took precisely 3 economics classes in university. You earned a C+ in the most vital foundational one, and you never worked a single day in the sector of economics or finance in your professional life. And yet here you are, suggesting to radically rebuild the entire American economy with a scheme that costs, by some calculations, $93 trillion. Ma'am, based on those qualifications, I would not allow you to reorganize my sock drawer, let alone the motor of the free world. The hall exploded, as one half of the crowd burst into booming applause and shouts of encouragement. The other half screamed in fury, labeling the comments sexist or patronizing. Jake Tapper clutched his moderator's table, striving frantically to bring back some appearance of control as the volume level surged. AOC's visage was now flushed a dark red. Her teeth grinded as she waited for the din to fade so she could retaliate. She began to part her lips to answer, but Kennedy was not quite done with his opening bombardment. And just so we are crystal clear, Representative, he added, leaning over the table toward her, I am not mocking bartenders, as I have nothing but admiration for the service industry. What I am mocking are bartenders who believe that the experience of pouring a lager somehow qualifies them to remodel the entire system of global capitalism. There is a gigantic distinction between the two, and the American populace deserves to know which one they are receiving. He glanced at the crowd and then back at the lens with a wink. And folks, believe it or not, that was merely the warm-up, for I have 7 more rounds loaded and prepared to launch. As the program cut to a commercial interval, the strain in the room was tangible. CNN obviously required the time to digest the absolute intensity of what was transpiring on their stage. When the cameras went black, the mood did not cool down. If anything, the energy in the studio became even more charged. Tapper was observed speaking urgently into his earpiece, likely getting new directions on how to manage a debate that had gone totally off the tracks of civil political discourse. When they came back from the pause, Tapper attempted to guide the discussion toward what he likely believed was safer, more impartial territory. Let us talk about tax policy, he proposed, perhaps wishing that a dull conversation of percentages and brackets would decrease the temperature. Kennedy brightened up instantly, his eyes shining with revived interest. Oh, good. Taxes. I adore speaking about taxes, as it is one of my preferred topics. He shifted his focus back to AOC. Representative, you speak quite a bit about the wealthy paying their fair share, and I actually concur with you fully on that principle. Everyone ought to pay precisely what they owe under the statute, so I think we discovered some common ground there. So with that in mind, let us discuss your visit to the Met Gala. AOC's eyes dilated slightly, knowing exactly where this was leading, and the common ground Kennedy referenced was clearly a precipice he was about to shove her off. Kennedy reached into his pile of papers and extracted several high-quality glossy color photographs. September 2021, he stated, holding them up. You attended the Met Gala sporting a very lovely, very expensive-looking white gown with the phrase, "Tax the Rich," splashed across the rear in massive red characters. It was very striking. It made quite the declaration, didn't it? The gown was created by Aurora James, a very gifted designer. Now, as we all know, tickets to the Met Gala cost a cool $35,000 each. He extended the photos so the crowd and the millions viewing at home could see AOC in her frock, surrounded by high society stars, camera flashes, and the type of opulence that defines the top 1%. Now you asserted at the time that the pass was borrowed or gifted to you, and the creator said you were her personal guest. That is fine. That is wonderful. But here is where my simple country lawyer brain begins to get a little befuddled. Senator Kennedy reached for his legal notepad, his pen floating over the sheet like a surgeon about to perform the initial cut. The Internal Revenue Service, he started, has these annoying little things called regulations, specifically rules regarding gifts and perks. You see, according to the tax code, anything over a specific value, currently $15,000, that is given to an individual must be reported as earnings, and more importantly, it must be taxed. He started to scribble in big, bold figures on his pad, rotating it so the lenses could broadcast the calculation to every living room in America. Let us do some fundamental arithmetic, starting with the ticket cost of $35,000. Then we have that custom-made designer gown, and based on similar items by that same creator, we can conservatively guess the value at somewhere between $60,000 and $80,000. Add in professional hair and cosmetics, which likely cost several thousand, and the various luxury accessories, let us just call those a flat $5,000. When you add it all up, we are looking at a total worth of roughly $100,000 in free merchandise and services supplied to you for that one single evening. Kennedy looked up from his tablet, his eyes locking onto AOC's. Now, Representative, I have taken the liberty of browsing through your financial disclosure documents for the year 2021. As for a member of Congress, those are public records. I have looked through every page, and I do not see any reporting of these presents, not a single cent. Now, the tax liability on $100,000 of extra income at your specific tax bracket would be somewhere in the vicinity of $35,000 to $40,000. So my inquiry is very simple. Did you pay taxes on this $100,000 gift? The quiet that ensued was thick and awkward for a few seconds, with the only noise being the faint buzz of the studio lamps. Kennedy did not let the silence break. He leaned into it. Let me ensure I am comprehending the optics here accurately. You wore a tax-the-rich frock to a $35,000 per plate gala, where you rubbed shoulders with the very millionaires and billionaires you claim to loathe. You accepted approximately $100,000 worth of luxury items and elite experiences for free. And then you did not pay a dime in taxes on any of it. He placed his pen down with a decisive snap. Ma'am, to the average American, that does not look like a political demonstration, that looks like tax evasion with superior fashion sense. AOC finally located her voice, though it was higher and more stressed than before. The gown was borrowed for the function, she countered rapidly. It was returned immediately afterward, so it was not a gift in the traditional sense. It was a loan for a professional appearance. Kennedy did not skip a beat, saying the $35,000 ticket was not returned, was it? The professional makeup was not returned. The 5-course dinner was not returned, and the experience of attending the most exclusive party in the world was not something you could hand back. He shook his head slowly, adding that even if we talk just about the dress, the IRS does not actually care if you gave it back the next morning. You received the full benefit and utility of wearing an $80,000 custom gown for the evening. I took the time to speak to some tax lawyers about this, real ones, by the way, who got much better than C+s in school. They informed me that if an employer or a benefactor loans you a $100,000 item for personal use, even temporarily, the IRS considers that a taxable perk. It is exactly like if your boss loans you a luxury Ferrari for the weekend, you have to report that as taxable compensation. Kennedy flashed that dangerous grin again, the one that signaled he was about to deliver a finishing strike. But I suppose, when you are busy making a grand public statement about taxing other wealthy people, you do not feel the need to actually pay taxes yourself. It seems to be a classic case of rules for thee, but not for me. Now, what is the word I am looking for? Is hypocritical too strong? No. He paused, appearing to ponder it. I think that is exactly the correct word for it. The conservative side of the audience was absolutely enjoying it, while the progressive side looked like they had just been collectively slapped. AOC attempted to respond, trying to pivot the conversation back to the broader, more abstract issues of wealth disparity and the systemic problems of the tax code. But Kennedy was already moving on to his next exhibit. Oh, and just one more thing on this topic, he added, almost casually, as he shuffled his papers. You know who really knows the ins and outs of tax law regarding gifts and benefits? Economists, real ones, people who actually studied the subject and understood the material. I am sure you meant well, Representative, but wanting to tax the rich is a lot easier than actually following the tax laws yourself, isn't it? Jake Tapper, sensing the need to move away from AOC's personal finances, tried frantically to switch the subject. Senator Kennedy, let us discuss job creation and economic development, he said, hoping to find a topic that would focus on policy rather than personality. Kennedy practically bounced in his seat. Perfect. Let us talk about Amazon, he said, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. Representative, you are from New York's 14th District, and you famously helped kill the Amazon HQ2 deal that was slated for Queens. I remember it vividly because you celebrated that outcome like you had just won the Super Bowl. Let us talk about that great triumph of yours. AOC straightened her posture, visibly relieved to be back on what she considered her home turf. That deal was nothing more than corporate welfare, she stated firmly. We were prepared to hand over $3 billion in public money to the richest man in the world while our schools and subways are crumbling, so it was a stand for the community. Stop right there, Kennedy said, holding up a palm. That sentence right there is where we need to have a little teaching moment, because that single statement reveals a fundamental, deep-seated misunderstanding of how economics actually works. A misunderstanding that unfortunately cost your own constituents 25,000 high-paying jobs. He pulled out a detailed breakdown of the Amazon deal. Amazon was planning to build its second headquarters in Long Island City, Queens, and they projected creating between 25,000 and 40,000 jobs over the next decade with an average salary of $150,000 a year. In exchange, the state and city offered $3 billion in tax incentives over 10 years. Kennedy turned his head to look directly into the camera. Now, everyone watching at home, I want you to understand something very basic. Tax incentives are not cash. Representative Ocasio-Cortez genuinely thought and told the public that New York was writing Jeff Bezos a $3 billion check. She thought there was a pile of $3 billion sitting in a bank account, somewhere that she could suddenly spend on schools or subways once the deal was dead. He turned back to her. But that is not how it works, is it? Can you explain to this audience right now what a tax incentive actually is? AOC began to stumble through an explanation about tax breaks and corporate giveaways, her voice lacking the conviction she had moments before. Kennedy let her finish, then began to correct her with the patient, slightly disappointed tone of a professor dealing with a student who had not read the syllabus. A tax incentive means Amazon would have paid less in taxes than they otherwise would have, Kennedy explained. The key words are, than they otherwise would have. So if Amazon does not come to New York gets zero tax dollars from Amazon. If Amazon comes to New York with incentives, New York gets some tax dollars from Amazon, just not as much as they would have without the incentives. And as anyone who finished middle school knows, some is significantly more than zero. He held up an economic analysis. Economists, real ones, the ones who got better than C+s, analyzed this exact deal. They found that Amazon would have generated approximately $27 billion in new tax revenue for the state and city over 10 years. The incentives would have cost $3 billion in uncollected potential revenue, meaning that is a net benefit of $24 billion. That is $24 billion that could have gone to those schools, subways, and infrastructure projects you mentioned. But instead, you got nothing. Kennedy pulled out another set of data. But it gets even worse, because those 25,000 jobs with an average salary of $150,000 represent $3.75 billion in annual wages just from direct employment. Then you have the indirect jobs, like the restaurants, the dry cleaners, the coffee shops, and the construction workers. Economists estimated another 67,000 jobs would have been created in the surrounding ecosystem. He looked at AOC with a look that bordered on pity. You killed 92,000 potential jobs because you thought tax incentives were actual liquid cash. You celebrated saving $3 billion that did not exist while simultaneously losing $24 billion that would have existed. And do you want to know the most ironic part? He pulled out a final document for this round. Amazon still opened facilities in New York. They just did not open them in Queens. They did not open them in your district. So you did not stop Amazon. You just stopped your own neighbors from getting those good jobs. Staten Island got an Amazon facility. The Bronx got one. But your district got absolutely nothing except a higher unemployment rate. He leaned forward, his voice low and steady. Ma'am, you thought incentives were money in a vault. That is not a policy disagreement or a different vision. That is a failure to grasp the most basic concepts of economic growth. And 25,000 families paid the ultimate price for your C+ understanding. The room was deathly silent, and even the progressive activists in the front row found it hard to cheer. The precision with which Kennedy had laid out the math made the triumph look like a self-inflicted wound. And for the record, Kennedy added quietly, $150,000 a year is not the rich in New York City. That is a teacher married to a firefighter. That is 2 nurses. Those were working families who could have bought homes and sent kids to college, but you called them jobs for the rich and killed them because you failed Econ 101. The tension in the studio had shifted from a political disagreement to something closer to a forensic audit. Senator Kennedy reached into his stack and produced a relatively thin document, barely 14 pages long. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, he said, holding it up like a piece of evidence, This is your signature legislation, the Green New Deal. I read the whole thing, all 14 pages of it, and it took me about 8 minutes. To be honest, I have read Chinese food menus that were more detailed and better thought out. He began flipping through the pages, which were heavily marked with yellow highlighter and red ink. This document is quite the masterpiece of imagination, as it promises to make America carbon neutral in just 10 years. It guarantees a high-paying job for every single person who wants one. It promises universal health care, free college for all, and my personal favorite, the retrofitting or total rebuilding of every single building in the United States to meet new green standards. It is ambitious, I will give you that. But what I found most fascinating about this document is not what is in it, but what is missing. A cost estimate is missing. There is not even a rough guess, just big, beautiful, expensive promises. Kennedy leaned forward, his voice dropping into that serious, simple country lawyer tone. So I did what you apparently forgot to do. I asked some economists, real ones again, to estimate what this wish list would actually cost the American taxpayer. Do you want to hear their numbers? He did not wait for her to answer. The American Action Forum estimated it would cost roughly $93 trillion over the first 10 years. The Heritage Foundation and other groups put it in the same ballpark, with even liberal-leaning think tanks admitting it would cost at least $40 trillion. Let us be generous and split the difference. Let us call it $1 trillion. He began writing on his legal pad again, the scratching of his pen audible in the silent room. $70 trillion over 10 years is $7 trillion per year. For context, the entire federal revenue for 2022, every cent we collected in income taxes, corporate taxes, and payroll taxes, was about $4.4 trillion. Your plan, Representative, costs significantly more per year than the entire United States government actually collects. So the obvious question is, how do you plan to pay for it? AOC shifted in her seat, trying to regain her footing. We would tax billionaires, close corporate loopholes, and stop our wasteful military spending, she began, falling back on her standard rhetorical defense. Let us do the math on that, Kennedy interrupted, not looking up from his pad. The total net worth, not income but total wealth of every American billionaire combined, is approximately $4.5 trillion. If we literally confiscated every single penny they owned, leaving them completely destitute and on the street, we could fund your plan for exactly 7 months. Then what? Closing every corporate loophole might generate another $100 billion a year, if we are lucky. The entire military budget is about $700 billion, and I do not think you are proposing to leave our borders completely undefended. Even if you did, we are still short about $6 trillion every single year. Where is that money coming from? AOC tried to pivot toward modern monetary theory, suggesting that the government could print the necessary funds and that the economic transformation would pay for itself. Kennedy listened with a look of feigned interest before dismantling the logistics with cold, hard numbers. But the money is not even the most ridiculous part, Kennedy said, tossing his pen onto the pad. Let us talk about reality, as your plan promises to retrofit or rebuild every building in America in 10 years. There are approximately 136 million buildings in this country. So to do that, in a decade, you have 350 days. That means your plan requires us to retrofit or rebuild 37,000 buildings every single day, including weekends and holidays, for 10 years straight. He looked at her over his glasses. Ma'am, there are not enough construction workers in America to do that. There are not enough raw materials on the planet. The supply chains do not exist. The training programs do not exist. And the laws of physics do not allow it. He pulled out a map. You also promised to eliminate air travel and replace it with high-speed rail. The distance from New York to Los Angeles is 2,800 miles. Even the fastest high-speed rail in the world in China tops out around 200 miles per hour. That is a 14-hour train ride, and nobody is going to choose a 14-hour train ride over a 5-hour flight. You are not eliminating air travel. You are just destroying business, tourism, and family visits. He pointed to the rail requirements. To build the 30,000 miles of rail your plan requires in 10 years, we would have to lay 8 miles of track every single day. China, with an authoritarian government and zero environmental reviews, only manages about 1,000 miles per year. Do you honestly think America is going to build 3 times faster while dealing with union labor, environmental impact statements, and local zoning boards? Kennedy set the map down with a heavy thud. Your plan requires solar panels covering an area larger than the state of Texas, battery technology that has not even been invented yet at this scale, and a complete government takeover of every transportation system in the country. This is not a policy proposal, Representative. This is a children's letter to Santa Claus. You have promised every toy in the store, but you have not explained how Santa is going to manufacture them, how the reindeer are going to deliver them, or who is paying for the workshop. Because you do not understand economics, you do not understand logistics, and you do not seem to understand reality. We have to be ambitious if we are going to survive climate change, AOC protested, her voice rising in frustration. There is a difference between being ambitious and being delusional, Kennedy replied flatly. Ambitious was John F. Kennedy saying we would go to the moon, and then presenting a detailed engineering and financial plan for how to do it. Delusional is promising to eliminate airplanes and rebuild every house in the country in 10 years with no plan, no technology, and no money. You wrote a wish list and had the audacity to call it legislation. Senator Kennedy paused to take a sip from his I Heart Capitalism mug, letting the weight of the previous round sink in. AOC was visibly rattled. Her responses were becoming shorter, more defensive, and her gaze was shifting more frequently to her staff in the wings. Kennedy, however, looked like he was just getting his second wind. "Representative," he said, leaning back comfortably, "you talk a lot about income inequality. You speak passionately about how the rich are getting richer, while working people are struggling just to keep their heads above water. You have built your entire political brand on the idea that we need to aggressively redistribute wealth, so I would like to talk about your personal wealth for a moment." He pulled out a set of financial disclosure forms. When you were first elected in 2018, your disclosure showed you had about $15,000 in total savings. That was it, and you told the world you were living paycheck to paycheck, a true representative of the working class. It was a compelling story. He looked up from the papers, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But let us look at your life now, Representative. What kind of car do you drive?" AOC hesitated, her jaw tightening. "I do not see how my personal transportation is relevant to a debate on national economic policy," she countered. "It is a Tesla, isn't it?" Kennedy said, not waiting for an answer. He pulled out several photos. "Specifically a Tesla Model 3. It is a very nice car. I took the liberty of looking up the pricing, and a base model starts around $40,000. But the one you are driving in these photos, with the specific features and wheels visible here, probably cost closer to $50,000. My question is simple. How did a working-class hero afford a $50,000 luxury electric vehicle so quickly?" I make a congressional salary, AOC replied sharply. I work hard for that income. You certainly do make a congressional salary, Kennedy agreed with a nod. You make $174,000 a year. Now, for the folks watching at home who might not have their calculators handy, that puts you comfortably in the top 10% of all American earners. By every objective metric in this country, Representative, you are the rich you keep talking about taxing. But let us look at your overhead. He began scribbling on his legal pad again. You maintain an apartment in Washington, D.C. You live in the Navy Yard neighborhood, which is quite trendy, and rent there for a place like yours runs between $3,000 and $4,000 a month. You also have to maintain a residence back in New York, which is not cheap. You travel frequently, you wear high-end designer clothes to public events, and you clearly have a budget for professional hair and makeup. When I add up your likely required expenses, you are looking at $1,000 to $10,000 a month in lifestyle costs. That is roughly $120,000 a year right there. He tapped his pen against the pad. Then you have your taxes on a $174,000 salary, meaning you are paying about $40,000 in federal and state income taxes. So if we do the math, out of your $174,000 salary, you are spending about $160,000 on your lifestyle and your tax obligations. That leaves you with maybe $14,000 a year for savings, and yet you went from $15,000 in total savings to owning a $50,000 luxury car in just a few years. Where did the extra money come from? AOC's face flushed a deep shade of red. I am fiscally responsible with my personal finances, she stated, her voice trembling slightly. I am sure you are, Kennedy said, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. But the math only adds up if we look at your other income streams. Oh, wait. He pulled out yet another document. Book deals, speaking fees. You wrote a book about being working class while making $174,000 a year. That is quite the hustle, I must say. He leaned back, spreading his arms wide. Here is my point, Representative. You make more money than 90% of the people in this country. You drive a luxury electric car. You live in expensive, exclusive neighborhoods in two of the costliest cities on the planet. You wear designer labels and attend gala events. You are by any definition wealthy. But you have built your entire public persona on pretending you are still the girl behind the bar. He held up a photo of her behind the wheel of the Tesla. You cannot be rich and pretend you are poor. You cannot drive a $50,000 car and claim to be the voice of the people riding the city bus. You cannot make more money than 9 out of 10 Americans and call yourself working class. That is not representation, ma'am. That is false advertising. I came from a working-class background, AOC protested, her voice rising. My father was an architect. I worked as a bartender. And now you are rich. Congratulations, Kennedy interrupted, his voice heavy with sarcasm. That is the American dream. You worked hard. You moved up. And you have made a very good life for yourself. I am genuinely happy for your success. But you cannot have it both ways. You cannot enjoy every single benefit of the capitalist system while claiming to oppose it. You need to pick a lane representative. Are you the rich elite or are you the working class? Because your Tesla says rich, but your rhetoric says poor. And in the real world of economics, you simply cannot be both. Senator Kennedy took a long, measured pause, adjusting his glasses as the atmosphere in the room shifted. His voice, previously sharp and mocking, took on a quieter, almost somber quality. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, he began, let us talk about your grandmother. This one is a bit more personal, And I think it is important because it speaks to the very heart of how you view the people you claim to represent. AOC's expression tightened instantly. She knew this territory well, but the look in Kennedy's eyes suggested he had done his homework far more thoroughly than any previous opponent. After the devastating impact of Hurricane Maria on Puerto Rico in 2017, Kennedy continued, you spoke frequently and very emotionally about the suffering of your family on the island. You painted a harrowing picture for your millions of followers. You said your grandmother was living in truly terrible, squalid conditions. A damaged roof that leaked, no consistent power for years, and inadequate access to the basic necessities like food and water. You were visibly moved when you spoke about it, and quite frankly, the American people were moved too. It was a compelling, heartbreaking story of a family left behind by the government. He pulled out a series of printed tweets from June 2021. In these posts, you blamed the Trump administration entirely for her continued suffering years after the storm had passed. You called it a national disgrace that an American citizen was living in such conditions. It was a powerful narrative, and it did exactly what you wanted as it went viral, sparked outrage, and framed you as a fighter for the vulnerable. Kennedy held up another document, this one a press clipping. And that is when Matt Walsh, a conservative commentator you certainly do not agree with, decided to take you at your word. He thought, if this woman is suffering as badly as the representative says, we should help her. He organized a GoFundMe campaign, and within hours, regular Americans of all political persuasions had donated over $100,000 specifically for your grandmother to fix her roof, restore her power, and ensure she was safe. Kennedy looked over the top of his glasses, his voice hardening. And you know what you did? You refused the money. Your office released a statement calling the fundraiser a stunt. You said it was offensive, and that your family did not need help from conservatives. You turned away $100,000 in actual tangible aid from people who genuinely wanted to help a suffering elderly woman simply because the money came from the wrong political team. But here is the real kicker, representative. He pulled out a final set of articles and photos. Reporters actually went to Puerto Rico to check on your grandmother. They found the house you had described as a ruin. And do you know what they discovered? The house was fine. The repairs had been completed long ago. Your grandmother was living comfortably surrounded by family, and she even told the reporters herself that she was doing okay and that she had everything she needed. So let us look at the math here. You told the country she was suffering to score political points against your opponents. But when people offered actual money to fix the problem you claimed existed, you rejected it because accepting it would have ruined your narrative. And it turns out the crisis was largely a fabrication for the cameras. Kennedy leaned forward, the simple country lawyer persona replaced by a cold prosecutorial focus. That is not advocacy, representative. That is exploitation. You used your own grandmother's life as a political prop, exaggerated her suffering to get attention for yourself, and when actual help was offered, you prioritized your brand over her well-being. You had a choice. You could have accepted the help, thanked the donors, and shown the world that Americans can put politics aside to help each other. Instead, you insulted the donors and kept the suffering story alive as long as it was useful to you. It tells us everything we need to know about your priorities. It is not about helping people. It is about looking like you are helping people while the cameras are rolling. AOC tried to jump in, her voice crackling with indignation. I was making a broader point about the systemic failure of the government's response to Puerto Rico, she shouted. But Kennedy was already shaking his head, cutting her off before she could regain her rhythm. You do not make a broader point by lying about your own family's situation, ma'am. You do not create a crisis that does not exist just to make your opponents look bad. That is called a lack of integrity, and no amount of Twitter followers can fix that. You chose the narrative over the truth, and tonight, the receipts have finally caught up with you. The audience was gasping at the precision of the attack. Even the progressive side of the room was notably quiet now, the energy having shifted from a spirited debate to something far more damaging. Kennedy, meanwhile, looked completely unfazed, already reaching for the next folder in his stack. "And folks," he said, looking at the camera with a wry smile, "we have got 3 more rounds to go, so do not go anywhere." Jake Tapper looked like he was reconsidering his career choices as he tried to regain control. But Senator Kennedy was now the undisputed conductor of the evening. "Representative," Kennedy said, his tone shifting back to a conversational, almost curious register, "where exactly do you live when you are working for the people in Washington, D.C.? AOC, sensing another trap but unable to avoid the question, answered cautiously, "I have an apartment in the Navy Yard district, as you mentioned earlier. It is a standard arrangement for members of Congress who have to maintain 2 residences." Kennedy did not miss a beat. "Let us talk about that specific building. It is a brand-new luxury development built in 2018. It features a stunning rooftop pool, a state-of-the-art fitness center, a yoga studio, a residence lounge, a full concierge service, and a secure parking garage. It is by any definition an elite living space." He pulled out the rental listings for her specific floor plan. Rent for a 1-bedroom in your building runs between $3,000 and $4,000, and for a 2-bedroom you are looking at $6,000. Now hey, you work hard, you are in the top 10% of earners, and you deserve nice things. That is the American way. His expression then turned pointedly sharp. "But here is what is interesting, Representative. This building is exactly the kind of luxury development that you have spent your entire career opposing in your own district in Queens. You have stood on street corners and told your constituents that buildings like this are instruments of gentrification. You have claimed they displace working people and destroy the fabric of local communities. But the moment you got a taste of that congressional salary, you moved into one yourself. So my question is, are luxury apartments only immoral when they are being built in Queens, or do they suddenly become essential when they have a rooftop pool that you want to use?" He pulled out her voting and advocacy records from 2019. In your own district, a similar waterfront development was proposed. It was a beautiful project that would have brought investment and housing to the area. You fought it tooth and nail. You said it would gentrify the neighborhood and push out working families, so the project was successfully blocked. And yet, while you were blocking housing for your neighbors, you were signing a lease for a luxury unit in D.C. with the exact same amenities. Kennedy leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, devastating rumble. "Your building in D.C. has strict security, key fob access, cameras, and controlled entry. There are no homeless shelters nearby. In fact, your building's management has actively lobbied against affordable housing developments in the immediate area. You know why? Because the people who pay $4,000 a month for a luxury view do not want affordable housing next door as it affects property values. Did you speak out against that? Did you use your massive platform to demand that your building accept Section 8 vouchers? Or did you just enjoy your rooftop pool in peace, while the working class you represent struggled to find a place to live back home?" AOC opened her mouth to defend herself, but Kennedy held up a hand, silencing her. "There is more. Your building was constructed by non-union labor. The development company has a long and documented history of fighting unionization efforts. You have gone on record 100 times saying every major construction project in America should be union only. But you chose to live in and pay rent to a company that represents everything you claim to stand against." It seems your principles are very firm when they apply to other people's businesses, but they get a little flexible when it comes to your own comfort. Representative, that is not democratic socialism. That is classic limousine liberalism with a better Instagram filter. Where I choose to live is a personal safety and personal lifestyle choice, AOC protested, her face now a mixture of shock and sheer humiliation. It is personal until you make housing policy your primary political weapon, Kennedy shot back with lightning speed. You cannot live in the height of luxury while demanding everyone else accept Section 8 housing in their backyards. You cannot enjoy a private fitness center while calling luxury developments immoral. You cannot benefit from the efficiency of non-union construction while demanding that every other worker in America be forced into a union. That is the definition of hypocrisy, and tonight you have mastered it. Senator Kennedy took a moment to organize his final set of documents, his movements deliberate and methodical. This was the moment the audience had been waiting for, the closing argument of a systematic dismantling. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, he began, his voice dropping into a low, serious tone that commanded the entire room's attention. Let us talk about small businesses. You know, the backbone of the American economy, the engine that creates the majority of new jobs in this country, the place where the vast majority of your constituents actually go to work every morning. How do you truly feel about the men and women who risk everything to open a shop or a local service? AOC, looking exhausted and deeply defensive, gave a generic, rehearsed answer. I support our small business owners and entrepreneurship as a path to community wealth, she said, though the words lacked their usual fire. Kennedy smiled, but there was no warmth in it this time. That is a real nice sentiment, ma'am. It truly is. But here is the problem. Your voting record tells a completely different story. It tells a story of a politician who talks like a friend of the worker, but acts like the worst nightmare of the person who actually signs the paychecks. He pulled out a comprehensive legislative analysis. Since you entered Congress in 2019, there have been 17 major bills specifically designed to provide relief, regulatory reform, or capital access to small businesses. Do you want to take a guess at how many of those 17 bills you actually voted for? He did not wait for her to guess. 2. You voted for exactly 2 out of 17. That is an 11% support rate for the very people you claim to represent. You opposed 15 different pieces of legislation that were crafted to help the little guys stay afloat in an increasingly difficult economy. Kennedy began pulling specific examples from his file. Let us look at H.R. 1994, the Small Business Relief Act, which provided targeted tax relief for businesses with fewer than 50 employees, and you voted no. Let us look at H.R. 7010, the Paycheck Protection Program extension, the very program that kept millions of Americans employed during the height of the pandemic, and you voted no. H.R. 2870, which reduced the red tape for small business loans, you voted no on that one too. He looked up from the list, his eyes piercing. Why would someone who claims to be a champion of the working class vote against the very tools that keep those people's workplaces from going under? You claimed these bills had poison pills or corporate giveaways. But these were bills targeted specifically at companies with under 50 employees. We are talking about the bodega on the corner, the family-owned restaurant, the local bookstore. These are not the billionaires you rail against. These are your neighbors, and you turned your back on them every single time the roll was called. Kennedy then pulled out the most devastating data set of the night. And then came the pandemic. During those dark months, your district in New York lost 3,400 small businesses permanently. They are gone, and they are not coming back. And do you know who thrived while those family businesses were dying? The big chains, Target stayed open, Walmart stayed open. Amazon's profits reached the stratosphere. You supported the most draconian lockdowns. You supported keeping the non-essential local shops closed. And then you opposed the relief bills that would have given them a fighting chance to weather the storm. You stood by while 3,400 dreams disappeared in your district. And you know who the ultimate winner was. The big corporations you claimed to oppose. You did more for Jeff Bezos's market share in 1 year than a decade of Republican tax cuts ever could. He leaned forward, his voice rising in power. You have never run a business representative. You have never hired a single soul. You have never sat up at 3 in the morning wondering how you are going to make payroll on Friday. You have never had to look an employee in the eye and tell them you cannot give them a raise because the government just piled on another mountain of regulations or hiked your taxes again. You have never worried about competition from a multi-billion-dollar corporation with deeper pockets and more lawyers than you have employees. But you sit in that air-conditioned office in D.C. and vote to make life harder for the people who actually do those things. You vote to raise their costs, you vote to increase their red tape, and you vote against every effort to give them a level playing field. And you do it all while wearing a tax-the-rich dress and calling yourself a champion of the people. Kennedy's voice then dropped to a whisper, which somehow made it even more devastating. Small businesses are not just statistics on a page representative. They are the immigrant family running a grocery store. They are the single mom who started a cleaning service to provide for her kids. They are the American dream in its purest form. And your policies, backed by your C-plus understanding of economics, are killing that dream. Your father was a small business owner. He ran an architecture firm, so he knew the risk, the sweat, and the sacrifice it took to build something. And somehow, his daughter grew up to become the greatest threat to small business in the United States Congress. He gathered his final documents, the room so silent you could hear the cameras clicking. You have never created a job. You have never made anything except speeches. But you have used your power to crush the people who actually build this country. You have helped the big corporations destroy their local competition. And you have had the nerve to call it progress. Representative, the working class does not work for billionaires in ivory towers. They work for the small businesses on Main Street. And you are putting them out of business, one vote at a time.